The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Well, hello everybody and welcome to the second of our Leadership in Workplace coaching series for 2013. My name is Natalie Ashdown. I'm the CEO here of the Open Door Coaching Group, and once again, it's my pleasure to be presenting this interview for you today. This leadership series, if you're a first comer to the leadership series, it's a unique opportunity for you to learn from the leaders in workplace coaching today. And we're bringing you interviews with a range of leaders across different organisations, roles and backgrounds. And what's particularly unique is that each interview is shaped by you, the participants, who have provided questions that you'd most like me to ask. And I have to say, this time round with this leadership series, today's leadership series, I've just received so many questions, so we'll try to cover as many of them as we can. So some of you might remember that we launched last year's series with an interview with Sir John Whitmore. In that interview, he said that never has there been a moment in history that has so required leaders to take a coaching approach. And this year we launched the series with Marvin. He's an internationally renowned NLP master trainer and the co-developer of mBraining. He brings over 27 years of experience in NLP, and he was one of the first 5 NLP master trainers originally certified by Richard Bandler, who was the co-developer of NLP. Marvin's one of the founders of the International NLP Trainers Association, and he's on the board of directors. He's actually sought after by NLP students and NLP trainers around the world. However, he retired from conducting NLP trainings many years ago when the marketplace started to become commercialised and commoditised. So Marvin has been encouraged by people like myself to come back and train. And after his opening webinar, he did our first webinar for this year. We asked him to come back and tell us more about the latest advances in coaching called mBraining. And he's spearheading this new advances with his colleague Grant Salu, and we're also asking him to share his exciting plans for NLP in the workplace. So that's a wonderful big introduction, and it's my pleasure to welcome Marvin to the line.
Well, thanks, Natalie. It's great to be online.
Terrific. Thank you so much for joining us. And as I mentioned to everyone, we listened to you in our last leadership series just last month, and we had such a great overwhelming response to want to hear more about what you've been doing. So thank you so much for coming back the second time in a row.
My pleasure.
Great. So Marvin, for the last couple of years, you've been working with your colleague Grant to create the latest advancements in neuroscience, and the technology is called mBit. That's what you've named it, and it's about multiple brain integration techniques. So can we start the interview, please, with you sharing with us, what do you mean by multiple brains? What's all this about?
Some of the more exciting findings in the latest research in neuroscience show that we actually have 3 functioning brains, or 3 what's called complex adaptive neural networks. So it's not just in our head that we actually have a brain. We have technically a brain also in our heart. Our heart is a complex adaptive neural network, and so is our gut. Our gut is also technically a brain. Now, there are certain things that make a brain a brain. You can't just call anything a brain. It has to have certain factors, such as it has to have certain classes of neurons. For instance, it has to have neurons, interneurons, support neurons, glial cells, astrocytes, etc. It has to have neurotransmitters, the amount of chemical bath that's there required for these neurons to talk with each other. And it's got to it's got to demonstrate certain characteristics of a brain, such as the capacity to take in, perceive information, to store information, to process it, to have memory, and to be able to adapt, to learn, to update. And yes, sure enough, neuroscience has found that our heart thinks, our heart has memories, our heart has neuroplasticity and can adapt and learn, and so can our gut. And the implications for all of this are quite profound when we actually realize our thinking, memory storage, our responsiveness to things, our intelligences really, is not just limited to just what's in our head, but also in our heart and our gut. In essence, neuroscience is finding what wisdom traditions have been saying for the last 2,500 to 3,500 years.
And Marvin, I remember when I first read your book, and it talked about the 3 brains, and I suppose it took me I had to reread chapter 1 and chapter 2 again, actually, to really try to understand what you were talking about. Why is understanding that there's 3 brains, and I've got the slide up here with each of them there, why is that so important?
What's important about understanding that we've got 3 brains is that the 3 brains actually do different things. And we see it, and we hear it in common everyday language. For instance, when people say things like they have a gut response or a gut instinct on something, or when people say "listen to your heart," what does that really mean, and why do we have these kinds of references that go across cultures? Because these are 3 different intelligences, and they do very, very different. They have different competencies, they have different abilities, different talent sets, and once we explain it, it'll be obvious to you in hindsight. And so it's what Grant Suslu, my colleague and co-author, have what we call the prime functions, the 9 prime functions of each of these. So everyone's pretty familiar with the head brain, for instance, and what the head brain is very good at. It's good at obvious things like cognitive perception. It perceives things, and it thinks about things. It can do analysis, synthesis, problem solving, etc. And it's also good at making meaning of things. It can create narrative. It creates storylines. Our head's very, very good at creating a story or a narrative about something and what things mean. Our heart, in contrast, does very different things. It's good at a whole different set of competencies. It's good at our emotional abilities or emoting processes. So when people have deep feelings, they feel them in their heart. And we hear it when people speak. When they say, "I need to have a heart-to-heart with someone," or "I feel it in my heart," they often don't mean we need to have a logical conversation or my logic's very clear.
Sure.
It means that they're processing things very deeply in their heart. The heart's also responsible for things like the valuing processes. Your values come into effect in your heart when things are important to you. Many people are often gesturing to their heart or referring to something that is close to their heart, meaning it's very important to them in terms of their values. And also the way we feel about each other, our relational affect, how we feel about our relationship with someone, is also within our heart. Our gut, completely different. Our gut is responsible for things like our core identity. When we start to say, people they need to digest something or they need to assimilate it, it means they need to chew on something, real gut-based language. It means they need to take it into their core sense of self. Self-preservation, things like boundaries, safety, the fear issues are often processed in the gut. You hear people talk about butterflies in the stomach. Or when people have anxiety issues, they often feel it in their gut. Their gut gets tense, or it wants to either throw up or have the runs. And mobilization is when someone has gut courage or they need to take some gutsy action. A lot of references to actually going into action have to do with getting the gut mobilized. And so when we recognize that our 3 different brains, or our 3 different intelligences, are responsible for these 3 different competencies, well, it changes considerably, A, how we understand ourselves, B, how we pay attention to our intuitive signals about or how we're responding to any particular situation. And certainly, in a coaching context, it provides tremendous insight into what are the very natures of your client's issues and how you need to facilitate them. That if someone's trying to facilitate heart-based issues or gut-based issues via their head-based thinking, that's clearly not going to work.
Yeah, we talked a bit about that. Just so everyone knows, I actually have done Marvin's course on mBit, and you're now training myself and a number of colleagues to be trainers in the technology, which is very exciting. And we talked a lot about that people try to go about their day-to-day solving their problems using their heads, or leaping into great action, which comes from the gut, but actually they're using the wrong set of functions or using the wrong network to actually solve the problem.
Yeah, there's several things that need to come into play once we now realize that these 3 intelligences are 3 different intelligences. One is being able to access all 3 whenever you're trying to make a very important decision. Secondly, you need to get them aligned so that they're working together. So when people are trying to make their decisions on their daily life, or daily decisions, or even some life-changing ones, particularly people in leadership positions having to make some very big decisions that affect so many people, it's absolutely essential that all 3 intelligences are tapped into and utilized, and that they're aligned. Because we hear it when people are when they talk about some of their life challenges, or even some of their business challenges, we hear it where it's head versus heart versus gut. My head's saying one thing, my heart's saying another thing, my gut may be saying something completely different. And it's true because they're having three very different intelligences at work, and all three need to be listened to and need to be integrated into that decision-making process. And many clients in a coaching situation, that's some of their a good part of their major issues is these three intelligences are either not being listened to, something's being, the heart's not being attended to, or the gut's not being listened to, the head's overriding with all the story, or they're not aligned in a particular way. And we see so much of the dysfunctionality in major corporations today is often because one or more of these intelligences wasn't incorporated in the original decision-making process, usually the heart in large
Yes.
organizations.
Yeah.
Mostly it's a head-gut-based reaction, gut protection, fear happening, risk avoidance, and then therefore the head starts making a decision. And then we wonder why we have problems with things like staff engagement or execution of strategy because people, their heart's not engaged. People don't really want to do it, which is a heart-based factor. So yeah, all these things do need to come into play, and they need to be integrated, aligned with each other, and then harnessed to their highest potential. And there's now science for all of this.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, Marvin, how do you actually tap into the intelligences? You're talking about tapping into the intelligences, listening, and then aligning the three intelligences. How do we actually do that?
Oh, no, this is absolutely an essential element, particularly in the modern day business world. See, in modern day, in our 21st century living today, we live in a very high stress environment. We have so much complexity to our decision making. At an individual level, many people are still trying to balance things like how do I balance the economics of my life with what's authentic for me, what my passion is about, and it might show up in things like work-life balance issues, or it just might simply be, they feel like they're in the wrong job, but they're afraid to leave it because it's, this is where they're getting their economics from, their money from, but their heart's really somewhere else. And this causes a lot of stresses in life, and there's so much complexity in modern day living. And so this capacity to now tap in and to our intuitions on all three brains and to align them is often no trivial task. And the first factor we have to look at in order to answer your question of how do we do it is we have to look at a part of our neurology known as the autonomic nervous system. Now, the autonomic nervous system is autonomic, so it's functioning outside of your awareness. It functions by itself, and it does a range of things, keeping your heart beating. It keeps your hair growing. It does a whole range of things, keeps your lungs breathing. But there's two arms to it. One arm of the autonomic nervous system is called the sympathetic system, and that's the part of the system that gets you up. It stimulates you. But if it's done too much, you go into a high stress response. It's the part that gets you excited. It's the part that gets you moving, but it's also the part that can keep high tension if there isn't a balance. The balancing side is the parasympathetic arm, and that's the side that allows you to relax, to calm down, to let go of all tensions and stress. But of course, if it goes too far, we get lethargy, apathy, depression. We get heavy gravity days, as we
Yes.
lovingly call them.
Yeah.
And we need to balance the two. So when we're in a stressed state, thanks to modern day living and most people today, if I go to practically any organization and I ask a group of people, how many of us in here have been stressed and burnt out, everybody can raise their hands at some point. And often if we're overly sympathetic, overly stressed, the likelihood we can tap into our head, heart, and gut-based intuitions is unlikely because we're always in defense and reaction. And if we're overly parasympathetic, we're too depressed, we're too apathetic, we just basically don't care, everything falls in the too hard basket. And again, we're just trying to protect ourselves, do some self-care, not really being able to really attend to ourselves attend to our intuitions in any great degree of wisdom. So the first step to tapping into the intuitions of your head, heart, and gut is to actually get a balance between the sympathetic and parasympathetic. Well, how do you do that? Because it's part of the autonomic nervous system. And we see it every day. I see it whenever I'm working with large organizations, working with executive teams. They'll walk into the door for a workshop or for a strategy session or whatever it might be, or even an executive coaching session. And so many of them walk in stressed, and they're uptight, and they've got such a workload, such a heavy schedule, and the likelihood we can have a great coaching session now is pretty unlikely unless we can actually change their biochemical balance in that moment. Or sometimes they'll come in and they're just so burnt out that they're stressed, they're apathetic, they're depressed, and they really couldn't be bothered. And if they've lost their passion in life, or they've lost their passion for their job. And again, not much is going to happen unless we can get them out of that particular neurobiological state. Great news is that nature has a natural way of balancing the sympathetic and parasympathetic. and that process is breathing.
Hmm.
During the inhalation process, it stimulates the sympathetic nervous system, and when you exhale, it stimulates the parasympathetic nervous system. And you'll see it, for instance, in sports or even in your own personal life. When you want to pump up, the first thing people do is take an in-breath in order to pump up. And when they've stressed or holding tension for too long, the first thing they'll do is a giant exhalation, a giant sigh, for instance, just to kind of let the air out, and that exhalation allows the parasympathetic to kick in. Well, neuroscience has found that if you do a balanced inhalation and exhalation, so in what neuroscience is also finding is roughly it's about, for most adults, roughly the equivalent of about 6 seconds of inhalation in, roughly a 6-second exhalation out, and you do an even inhalation exhalation. You balance the sympathetic parasympathetic. It can be measured in a biofeedback machine that measures something called heart rate variability. And when you do, we go into a non-stress state, more of an optimum functioning state. And from there, just through a simple process of a few minutes of balanced breathing, suddenly we now have instant access to our gut and heart intuitions. The gut signals and the heart signals can now become accessible.
And Marvin, I'm imagining that that there's some people on the line that will be saying, "Well, I understand the three brains, and now you're asking me to do breathing, so I can kind of understand that." But can you explain to us what are the implications now for leadership if people really were to embrace the concepts that you're talking about? I'm thinking about some of the skeptics that go, "Hang on a minute, so you want us all to breathe now?"
Yeah. Well, we've got two parts to this. One are the implications, and another is, well, how would you get any of this across to leaders that
Yes,
are particularly those that are executive coaches?
exactly.
So let's deal with this latter one first, because that's the first thing. Is if we can't get a leader to actually go with all of this, then it's all kind of a pointless conversation. I found I've worked with a lot of executives and a lot of people in very, very senior leadership positions, and this is obviously the first step. Is how do we actually get this across to the left brain, head brain, the left brain side of the head brain in particular that wants the logic, etc. Well, the first thing is letting them know that this isn't woo-woo personal development
Yeah.
that comes out of just fantasy. It's based in neuroscience. This is what neuroscience is showing, and then there are practical techniques for making those neuroscience findings come into practice, something that you can actually do, something that makes a difference for you. And that it makes sense, doesn't it, that as a leader, you need to be able to make not only effective decisions, you need to make wise decisions that actually make things better in the future and make things better in a large-scale systems, in a systems way when you're dealing with high levels of complexity. And so when you do this, by definition, if you're stressed when you're making these decisions, or if you're slightly on the parasympathetic and more depressed apathetic side, neither one of those is going to be optimum for making wise decisions. A state of being in flow, in the flow zone, a state of being in an optimum state where you've got full access to all your faculties has to be a better goal as a leader, as a way to actually to make decisions when you're dealing with high level pressures and complex pressures. And that is a skill. That is a skill that can be learned. Great leaders that succumb to stress and pressure obviously are not going to end up being great leaders for very long. And very similarly, under stress, under high pressures, if someone in a leadership position goes into apathy, depression, etc., they're not going to be great leaders for very long. It's the ones who not only can handle the stress, but can actually channel it to use that energy to make effective decisions. It means they've got to maintain their neurological levels of peak performance. And there are ways to do that, as neuroscience is showing. Now, to convince them often, I will often show them the science, both on paper, as well as hook them up to a biofeedback machine. So if there's any coaches out there not familiar with a group called HeartMath, the HeartMath Institute, I highly recommend that they check them out. And one of the things you can get from the HeartMath Institute is, for very, very low cost, a beautiful little biofeedback machine that measures heart rate variability, measures the balance between sympathetic and parasympathetic. And with practically every executive I've ever worked with along this mBraining approach, I've hooked them up to the machine, and then they can see for themselves that by a simple process of simply breathing in and out for a period of 6 seconds in and 6 seconds out, inside of a minute, inside of 60 seconds, they can go from a stress state to a more balanced state, and from there have greater access to their faculties, and it's instant proof for them. And usually, every time I've ever shown this, they've never questioned it again.
Mm.
And then we're not talking about having to go to deep 2-hour meditations. It's simply
Yes.
breathing and in about a minute or two. That's simply it. And you hear it in people's language anyway. You need time to catch your breath. You need time to actually take a breath before you actually get into some big decisions. We're just saying it's not just taking a breath. It's the way you take it that makes a difference.
Indeed, and there's a question that was asked, which is really interesting. It's completely related to what you're saying, and someone has asked when the main leadership strength is actually driving performance. So that's the strength of the group, and I sort of hear that that's about the gut brain and the head brain. You know, making decisions, driving performance. What's the hook that you see that will get CEOs involved to look at the entire three brains, the alignment?
Look,
You know, when they're actually using, sorry, Marvin, I was going to say when they're actually using one or two of the brains so dependently, and you know they're highly successful as well.
yes, exactly. Now, there's two different angles to take a look at this from, and perhaps some people may be familiar, some of our listeners may be familiar with a book that came out several years ago, written by three authors, Dotlick, Cairo, and Ryan Smith, and their book was titled Head, Heart, and Guts: How the World's Best Companies Develop Complete Leaders.
Mm.
And they had some very interesting frameworks in there saying that complete leaders, true leaders, actually have this balance between head, heart, and guts. Now, when they wrote the book, they didn't have the science that embedded mBraining offers now. And in fact, Grant and I did an interview with David Dotlick, and he loves what we've done. We've sent him a paper that we've written on leadership, the three brains in leadership, and he absolutely loved it. He distributed it to his co-authors as well as throughout his network, and he's given us a beautiful testimony. Now, basically, what they were saying, even way back then, even before the science, is they realized that leaders who are what they call are not complete leaders will have a range of different problems, both internally as well as within their own organization. So you can certainly drive for performance. You can just do head gut. Here's the strategic goal set up by our head, and so let's have the guts to go into action. Two things will start to emerge if the heart aspect isn't integrated into the way that they lead. Number one, a lot of people may or may not. It's a flip of the coin. They may or may not connect to the strategy. And you hear it again, where leaders often will talk about we've got problems with staff engagement, or we hear them talk about, well, we need to really change or transform the culture. We need organizational transformation around here. And often it's because the heart hasn't been involved. You can set your strategies with all the head-based logic, but if people's real values aren't connected, if they have no relational connection to all of this, and particularly with the younger generation, from Generation Y onwards, where they are looking for things like, is there a real social purpose to this? Is there something really, are we actually doing anything meaningful here? If that doesn't come into play and their hearts aren't engaged, at best you'll get some compliance out of people in their behaviors, but you won't get the 110% out of them if their hearts aren't really into it. Secondly, the next problem will be burnout, stress and burnout. We can push for numbers. We can do head-gut strategies and just push for numbers and work hard. And at some point, people will start to burn out, and and it'll show up in their health. It'll show up in their well-being. It'll show up in their general attitude about work, etc. And truth be said, an organization can survive that way as long as you keep just replacing people. And even the leaders will burn out after a while, and then the organization can just drive for numbers year after year if it's willing to churn through people that way. At which point you're going to really have to ask, what's the morals and ethics of that particular organization? Is that really the philosophy, and is that really okay with them? Do they really think that that's actually something acceptable? And I'm not saying it should be or shouldn't be. I'm just saying that's something that someone's got to be asking at some point in time. Whereas when the three brains are all integrated, what happens is you start with starting from the heart. It's interesting. We found that real authentic leaders, people who actually are truly inspirational, they don't just drive people out of sheer behavioral compliance, but they do inspire, they do make a difference out there in the world, and what they're doing does have meaningfulness for people. It starts with the heart. It starts with the heart intelligence that's connected. And we see it, for instance, if you read Richard Branson's book, his latest book, Screw Business as Usual, which is about global social entrepreneurism, where there's a balance between the successful economics of a business, as well as doing good in the world. And as Branson's point out, doing good is good for business. You don't have to just drive for the numbers at the cost of staff, at the cost of environmental degradation, or at the cost of social inequity. There are ways to actually have a more balanced, what we call ecological strategy that's in play. And it starts with the heart. Am I connected to the people? Is my heart intelligence connected to the people I affect? From staff to my customers to the community we serve to the other people that we affect. And when it starts from the heart, then the head can become creative. It's what we call the highest expressions. When the heart is compassionately connected to what's happening out there for people, and it wants to do good, it wants to add value, truly add value out there, then the head and its highest expressions can become creative to find ways to actually manifest that value proposition out there in the world. Well, typically what leaders would have called visioning in the process. But visioning isn't just let's go after a head-based goal. It has to start from a heart-based connection of wanting to add value, wanting to do good out there. Then the gut needs to have the courage to be able to do things, to act upon things that is true true to the heart, but even if it means going against status quo. And that's exactly what Branson is saying when he's saying screw business as usual. The business paradigm of just driving for the head-gut profits doesn't have to be the only model that's out there, but it takes the courage to actually find a new business model, a new way of doing things that's more connected to real human values. And it's then that we start to find truly inspirational companies. And this is where staff engagement is no longer a problem for an organization because people want to be there. And this is where we have leaders that are doing meaningful things. And it might sound idealistic, but it's not. We find that it's not idealistic. It actually is innate to the human. It's innate to our human nature to want to do the best that we can do, to do the best that we can be and do. It's innate to human nature to want to be able to add value, to stay connected to people, and to do work that's meaningful.
And I'm thinking things like, thank you, Marvin. I'm thinking things like you talk about staff engagement. I'm thinking that there's many problems in the workplace that would be solved by using the techniques that you're talking about and learning more about the three brains. Things like, sickness and absenteeism. I'm thinking about absenteeism that comes from a disconnect between the values, or disconnect with leaders, or disconnect about whether I should even be bothered to come to work. Have you sort of found that, or what's your opinion that a lot of those things could actually be solved?
Oh yeah, they're absolutely connected. And there's something even worse than absenteeism. Well, absenteeism is one of the indicators that one can look for in terms of what is actually happening in the morale and the culture of the place. Even if the absenteeism is whether it's real, people are for instance, not well and sick and having to take off, or they just simply don't want to come in.
Yeah.
That's certainly one indicator. But a worse one is what people are called presenteeism,
Mm.
which is when they show up but they're still not engaged.
Yes. Yeah.
Then they show up. They're happy to show up to work and just collect the check and go through the motions. But hey, you're not getting the best out of them. And two, in terms of the morals and ethics of the leaders that are in play, is that really how you want to be affecting people that come to work with you and for you? Is that really what your legacy in many ways for people in a leadership position? That's the effect you want to create. And the notion that people come in and are present, but they're not really. They're physically present, but their hearts and their minds and their guts are not really there. Why would you want to create that? And yet people do, organizations do, simply by not being integrated. So the implications are quite huge on so many fronts. And you'll find organizations that do have engaged the head, heart, and guts of their people because the leaders are connected and engaged in their own head, heart, and guts. You'll know these are the qualitatively different types of places, and these are the kinds of things that typically show up, getting written about in management books as benchmarks.
Yeah, and I think what is inspiring me so much is that when you're talking about the heart-led or the heart-based leadership, you're not just talking about the touchy-feely, let's all go hug each other, or go out to coffee. You're talking about something that's at the deeper level in terms of values, meaningfulness, culture, engagement.
Yeah, absolutely. There's no touchy feely in this at all. At one level, it's straight neuroscience, and it is straight also. Um, what is innate to the human? It's really when you get in touch with each of your intelligences, higher degrees of, for lack of better terms, without sounding fluffy, but there's a real meaning to what I'm about to say in terms of sports. There's a higher level of authenticity that shows up in the in how you lead and how you relate to people. And by that, I don't just mean it as a word. I really mean it in its true sense of authoring, the process of authoring who you are in your own life. When you actually tap in to your heart-based intelligence, you start to find what you really feel is true for you in your heart, what's really important to you in your values. How do you really feel? What is your real connection, your felt connection with the people that you lead or the people that you touch with your organizations? And from there, following the proper sequence of how these brains engage. Again, it goes from heart then to head. It starts with the heart. Then when it goes to the head goes into its processes of creativity. What's a creative vision? Something else that can become possible other than the current state than what's happening now? Well, what's a better vision of the future that could be based on what's true for you? And if it's a group, what's true for the group in terms of our connectedness to our people, to ourselves, to our customers, to the communities we serve? And given that, even if that creative expression or vision for what could be possible is not like the way it is today, then how do we have the courage in the gut to know that it's about an identity issue, it's about you expressing what's important, and it's about being able to act upon that. And that is just simply about being authentic. That's about about leading in a way that is true, as opposed to simply because you're too risk averse or it's too much upsetting the apple cart. There are ways to do things without upsetting the apple cart. There are ways to actually change businesses, as people like Branson, as well as many others, are starting to show. Different models of how to do business that's more authentic, more connected, and more innate to the human nature. And it's just simply a question of, at first, starting with, as a leader, are you open to exploring all of that? Are you open to actually just finding out about that?
Yeah, definitely. And I'm thinking also, you've been talking about groups as well, and there's a number of groups that I work with, and I imagine now that I've learned more about this that a couple of members of the group might actually be authentic and leading from the heart. As you say, they're emoting values, relational effect, whereas others are still working out of their heads, or others are still relying on their guts. Is it possible that you can align a group if they're sort of coming or starting at the different brains?
Yeah, okay, this is the tricky thing. The short answer is yes and no.
Mhm.
Let me explain the seeming contradiction in that answer.
Mm.
The short answer is or should I say the longer part of the answer is, are there processes to help people tap into their three brains and explore, have leadership conversations that are dialogues where we can explore what's important to us and where are we aligned, etc. Oh, yes, absolutely. Of course we can. And they can come from very disparate parts of the organization with very disparate views, and there are processes of getting alignment. Most organizational consultants will have various processes in which to do that. The key, though, is that if all three brains aren't involved in the dialogue, then anybody can do a head-brain argument against anybody else, and
Yes.
there's always one story versus another. And if people go into a fear-based response, their gut says, well, ego protection, fear and threat coming in terms of saving face or not looking good or whatever it might be, and they just defend. And at which point that's no longer a collaborative conversation or creative collaborative conversation at that point. So again, when the three brains are worked with properly, then yeah, you can actually have some meaningful dialogue to get people aligned. Having said that, relates to something I mentioned a bit earlier when people are looking at organizational transformation or cultural transformation. Look, there will be times when it might very well be that in the process of this conversation, a couple of people, one, two, or three people in a team, might realize at the core level of their own identity, what's true for them in their heart. At a gut level, my identity is saying this is really who I am and what I'm on about. And at a heart level, my values are this, and they're not aligned to where the organization is going. Well, then that means they have a decision to make.
Mm.
But it's a wise decision. It's one where they've actually tapped into themselves to see, am I aligned or not? So, in one way, there are processes to help people get aligned, but when you engage in them, that doesn't mean everybody, all those names and faces stay the same and all get on board. It might very well be that the wise thing to do is for some people to go find another organization or or whoever's or has the authority position might need to decide who actually is appropriate to stay on the team or not. So
Yeah.
sometimes, as I said, this is not airy fairy. Sometimes it does lead to some very hard decisions that need to be made, but you make them from a place of congruency rather than just reaction.
Yes, absolutely. And I'm also thinking, like, if teams are actually in conflict, I'm thinking about, as you said, anyone can make a really good logical argument and then defend it. But
Yes.
if teams are if teams are really in conflict, then this, using these techniques would be a really great way of starting to resolve that conflict. Really, starting with the heart.
Yeah, it starts with the heartbeat. As well, there's several principles that we've coded. Grant Sisler and I have it coded regarding how to actually work with these three brains. And one of the principles is, more often than not, there's always exceptions, but more often than not, the general principle is to start with the heart.
Mm.
And there's some basic reasons for this, ranging from the scientific reasons all the way to the just straight obvious practical reasons. So scientific reason is the majority of the signals flow upwards. Your gut and your heart brains develop long before your head brain does in the womb. Your gut actually develops first. It's more primal, so those signals are very primal. Safety protection signals are far more primal than analytical thinking, for instance. And then your heart forms after the gut. Now, to start with the heart, it's easier because the signals then go up. So if you start with, first of all, a desire, a heart-based desire and want and willingness to want to work together as a team. Is it important for you to work together as a team? That level of intention, of heart-based intention, goes a long way in being able to work out, a lot of the challenges that's going to come up. So the more practical reasons why you also start with the heart is it just makes sense, doesn't it? What we call blinding flash of the obvious.
Mm.
That since your heart's responsible for things like values, does the valuing processes, that if your heart doesn't value what you're proposing to be done, then you don't care. Basically, you're not going to. It's that simple.
Yeah.
You can create all the stories you want, but if your heart's not in it, you're not going to do it. It's that simple. Right? And so it's important to start with the heart. In team-based conflicts, do we want to work this out, or or at least do we want to find out if we want to work together as a team more? Then the head can take over. From there, if we've got that heart-based value, then the head can say, well, great, what's the common context for us? Why are we together? Let's start piecing together some rational ways of making meaning that unifies us, that aligns us. But it's got to start from a desire of wanting to be together, or at least exploring wanting to be together. And out of that, we can then shape at a gut-based level, who are we as a team? What are we on about? What do we act upon, etc.? Where are we as a collective identity deep within our gut? And until then, this is where if that doesn't happen, you'll find people that might, in the head, cognitively say, yes, I'm on the XYZ team in the organization, but their core identity is still going, well, not really. I show up for the meetings,
Yeah.
but there's the other people, and then there's me showing up. So, and you don't really get full engagement, and you can't by any definitions call that a high performing team.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, there's so much that in what you're saying. I need to listen to it all again, Marvin. But I'll keep so many questions come out of what you're saying. But I'll try to continue anyway. But so, one of the questions that we were asked actually in prior to the session starting is that neuroscience in coaching is apparently coming under fire for being too much like pop psychology. So kind of like the next big fad or the next thing. But well, everything that you've talked about has been rigorously proven, hasn't it?
Yes. Well, first of all, let me come back up and talk about the claim that some people might be, or the accusation some people might be saying that it's pop psychology.
Mm.
Well, a couple of things. Number one, they kind of separate out three different things here, right? So we've got neuroscience, we've got pop psychology, and we've got however it might be used in coaching processes.
Okay. Yeah.
And these are three very different things. Neuroscience is neuroscience. It's not pop psychology. It's neuroscience. Right?
Yeah. Sure.
Go read scientific papers. That's what it is. Whereas pop psychology or popular psychology is often a layperson's version of whatever. It could be latest findings in science. It could be anything else. It could be no science whatsoever. Just someone's coming up with a great idea and has been able to package it up and market it and becomes popular in the world of under the guise of psychology. And that's different. That's a whole different thing altogether. Now, however, these whatever combination there is being used in coaching and such. Well, what can I say? That's dependent upon on the coaches and whatever they're saying and whatever they're doing. Whereas MBIT, multiple brain integration techniques, and the processes it used to do what's called mBraining, the processes of aligning your multiple brains, is coming from that from two different arenas. One is it starts with neuroscience findings. My colleague Grant Suslo is he's an unbelievable scientist. He's got 6 major degrees ranging all the way from physics all the way to psychology, to a range of different things. He's also an electrical engineer, an IT programmer. I mean, the guy's he's an amazingly brilliant man. And he started off when I first talked to him, there were several hundred science papers that he's looked at. Since then, it's now over 2,500 science references that he's started to look at, and to pull together the foundations for what we then developed as multiple brain integration techniques. To test out the science things, we did a process, what we call behavioral modeling. We did a range of action research groups to look at basically field testing and saying, let's take live subjects and let's try and apply a lot of these things and let's see what actually happens in real life. So we're not just coming up with theories or good ideas. We need to see evidence of these applications and how they play out in real people, in real behavior, and let's see what happens. And so the MBIT techniques, the multiple brain integration techniques, is founded on science, but not limited to it, because then we also went out and took a look at what happens in real life, and based on that, we then formulated the techniques. And so this is why people are finding the techniques to be not only incredibly powerful, but there's also a way to actually communicate why they look like how they do. That it's not just pop psychology in the sense that it's a good idea. There's actually science behind it, and there's actually action research behind it as well.
And your action research came up with some tangible results and evidence. Is that those sort of things there on your website, are they?
Well, the entire book, the entire mBraining book, talks about what the actual
Oh, of course.
yeah, well, what the whole thing is all about. But yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Take some common things, for instance. When we take a look at things, for instance, the way people use language. When they say things like "don't lose your head" or "keep your head" or "someone has lost their head," what do we mean when people say those kinds of language phrases? What do they mean? Do they mean when when we say to someone, "keep your head," do we mean make sure you're in contact with your emotions? No, that does not. That's not what
Mm,
it means,
mm.
right? Everybody knows it means think. It means use your logic. It means don't get irrational. And yet at the same time, or I should say on the flip side, when people use language like, we need to have a heart to heart, or they wear their heart on their sleeve, or someone was broken-hearted, or someone's cold-hearted, or someone has a warm heart, do we mean their thinking is really clear? No, right? People are using those phrases in reference to things like feelings and
Yeah.
values and relational affect. And when people say things like, I had a gut instinct, or, I can feel it in my gut, or what's your gut response? We're not saying, what's your rationale for this? Nor are we even saying, what kind of feeling states are you going through? We're talking oftentimes fear, anxiety. We're talking about mobilization. There's a great book written, for instance, by Gavin de Becker called The Gift of Fear, where he started to analyze a whole range of people that were victims of violence and people who were able to avoid violent situations by their intuitive responses. And he found that the gut was often, the fear-based instinct, which is happening in the gut, is send signals. And the people who found themselves in a violent situation, upon reflection, many of them had a gut-based intuition that they shouldn't be in a particular place or shouldn't have done something, but they overrode it, did it anyway, and found themselves in trouble.
Mm.
Whereas others listened to the gut response, and for some reason they just didn't go down that alleyway, or for some reason they took a different turn on the road, or whatever it might be. Don't know why, but upon reflection they realized, they had a gut signal somewhere. And the gut was processing a fear-based signal. Where martial arts know this as well. They teach a lot of coming from the gut to be able to do self-preservation movements and things of that nature. And just look in the behavioral aspects of everyday life, we start to see these are very, very common patterns that are indicating things. So when someone says, for instance, when people don't realize we've got 3 brains, people might say, for instance, the limbic system in the head is the seat of emotions. Well, it only looks that way if you only look at the head.
Yes.
But if you actually look in a behavioral modeling side, take action research, and go out and ask people, I want you to feel something very, very deep. Feel deep felt emotion. Now, wherever you're feeling those sensations, point to it. Nobody points to the limbic system in their head.
That's right.
Everybody either points to the heart or the heart area or somewhere in their body.
Yeah.
Right? And we don't hear language. It doesn't make intuitive sense when people say things like, I love you with all my kidneys. Well, no, because we don't process it there.
That's right. Yeah, I love what you're saying.
you know.
It's the evidence is all around us, really, is what I'm taking from what you said. And I even started to write down some of the things that I say regularly, and I'm like, oh my goodness, look at all these ways that I'm referring to the different, to the different brains. The evidence is really there.
Oh yeah, look, and if I would suggest to the listeners, if they haven't done this, is just go to Google and just type in head, heart, gut quotes.
Yes,
And you're going to find some amazing stuff of people in businesses and leadership positions and the kinds of quotes that they say, ranging from the Donald Trump that says always trust your gut, whereas, you've got a Stephen Jobs that's saying things like, yeah, don't listen to everybody else's stories, but listen to what's in your heart and what's in your instincts, e.g. gut.
yeah,
And he even references, he says they know what's important to you, meaning those instincts know what's truer for you than what your
yes,
head-based stories are.
yeah.
And you just see so many of these kind of quotes from people in major business and political leadership positions, all referencing the head, heart, and gut. And in fact, even so, in wisdom traditions, uh, Grant also came across an amazing piece of research that found that in a set of comparative studies across religions and spiritual practices, it is more the norm than the exception that there's a reference to 3 or more souls.
Mm.
Which three. Another way of saying it is there's at least 3 or more different intelligences that's being referenced by most spiritual and wisdom traditions.
Yeah, I mean it's absolutely wonderful, and as you mentioned, you have written the book on it, which I'll put up in a moment. And there's so much to. I mean, once you start to read the book and start to learn, it's just amazing what I have found that sort of starts to unfold. So, in our short time together, we're only just opening up the conversation, really, not even being able to delve into any depth, but it's fantastic to listen to what you're saying.
Yeah, and the book basically gives aside from all the detail of it, it also gives you an overarching structure on how to actually work with your 3 brains, particularly from a coaching perspective. Because we wrote it mostly for people either going into working on themselves in terms of personal development, personal evolution, or also are in a coaching or people helping context. And it starts with what we call the MBIT roadmap, which is first helping people get into a state of autonomic balance, so they can attend to the intuitive signals of their 3 brains. Then getting into communication with each of these brains, tapping in to get the 3 brains' intuitive responses to a particular issue or decision that needs to be made. Then doing what we call the foundational sequence, an order in which to access the brains that allows them to get into alignment with each other so they integrate and get congruent with each other. Then optimizing their functioning to what we call the highest expressions, so that we can come from states, ways of being that are compassionate, connected to people, etc., creative in the head, and have courage in the gut. And from there, we start to find emergent wisdom can start to arise, things you normally would not have predicted at the start of a coaching session, where the person now coming from basically a higher order of neurological functioning start to emerge levels of wisdom that was not there in the earlier problem state when they first came to you for the session. They'll often come to you in a reactive state. I want to work on X, usually in response to a problem that they've got. And it's a reactive consciousness, which is very different from an authentic expression consciousness. And we get a whole different class of result at the end of an mBraining session.
Yeah, absolutely. And Marvin, just in the time we have available, can we also switch over and talk a bit more about NLP now as well? I realise that we're sort of pressed for time, but it opened up your last webinar with us. Opened up a lot of discussion around NLP, and I wrote an article to respond to that discussion to say that I actually felt that workplace coaching was missing NLP, and that we'd all benefit from a reinvigoration of NLP in the workplace. And and even myself, like I did NLP, trained with you nearly 9 years ago now, and I've
Mm-hmm.
found that when I've come back to study my NLP again, so much has opened up. It's like I've been reinvigorated to the depth of coaching and to my coaching. What are your thoughts on that? That NLP and MBIT now really needs to be embraced in the workplace.
Well, I think it's essential. As I mentioned on the last webinar we did, NLP is it's a behavioral change technology. It was developed by looking at master therapists, people who could make powerful, effective changes in other people, therefore ideally suited for people who work with other people. So when you've got a class of behavioral change tools or behavioral transformation tools like that, it seems crazy not to learn it. For some,
Mm.
I don't know why you wouldn't learn it. Now, how it's applied is up to the practitioner. It can be because it's a neutral technology. It can be applied for um, what we call unecological or unethical ways, or it can be applied for ways that can make tremendous, beautiful change in the world. Depends upon you, the practitioner. But I don't know why someone wouldn't want to learn it. Now, in terms of whether or not people are using it or not using it in their coaching, it depends on how they were taught their coaching skills. So much of NLP nowadays, it was um, laughed at or discredited when it first came out by people that weren't open to looking at it. Whereas now neuroscience is now proving why and how NLP actually works, the fact that it does, and they can actually now prove how it works, why rapport matching and mirroring skills work, etc., through mirror neurons, how the anchoring processes work through the neurological foundations of operant conditioning. A lot of these things are now provable, which NLP didn't have at the start. So a lot of the NLP skills, because they work, the NLP tools, because they're so effective and they work, much of it has now been just assimilated into a lot of different programs. Whether it's coaching, whether it's business communications, whether it's sales, whatever it might be, people, without calling it NLP, they've just built it in because the tools work. So there might be people out there now already using a lot of NLP and they might not be aware of it. But as you say, the value is in actually re-exploring, relearning it at a level of depth. And when you do, you get to understand the tools much deeper, and you get to understand what they really were and are on about. That rapport skills is more than just matching and mirroring body language. It's about being able to establish a deep sense of connection with the person, to be able to join models of the world, to be able to understand models of the world. And it requires some very big skills on the practitioner's part. And one of the first is, for instance, to be able to let go of your model of the world so that you can step into someone's model of the world, especially if it's very different from yours. Now, that's more than matching and mirroring. That's about human relations. That's about your willingness to actually accept other people for who they are. There's a whole different level of understanding that needs to come into play. And so I agree with you that the coaching world could really benefit from I like your term, a reinvigoration, by re-exploring and really understanding what NLP is really about. It can make a tremendous difference to the precision in your coaching, the effectiveness of your coaching, and again, it won't replace it. It's not an either or. What it will do is it'll significantly enhance the effectiveness of any coach.
Yes, and I also felt, Marvin, that for people that if it actually has been some years since you did your coach training or your coaching course, then I feel it. That I mean, I was going to say I feel it in my bones, but that's sort of an alignment, sort of. I really feel that people would benefit or even need to re-explore new coaching techniques and to look at the latest stuff. So, I was reflecting that, I did my MBA now over 10 years ago. So what I did in that MBA back then is it's probably not current. So have you got any sort of comments about I don't like to say should, but that need for people to really look at what is the latest and to increase your skills and to reinvigorate your skills if it's been a while, I suppose.
Yeah, look, and I'll contextualize it by saying that it depends on um, the person's intentions as a professional coach.
Yeah, yeah,
If they're busy and they're doing their thing, and that's great. That's no problem. But if there are those that are serious about really becoming the best professional coach that they can be, and they really, they're keen on always mastering their skills and upgrading their skills, then yeah, it's certainly worth relooking at, um, you know, getting reconnected back again with NLP, especially if they've done it before or several years back, for several reasons. One, now that you've got a range of that experience of combining what you know about NLP with your professional coaching, now a retake on NLP will give you much greater depth because you've got much more what we call reference structures to pull on and to generalize from. So you'll get a lot more out of it. Secondly, there's a lot that has changed in NLP.
Mm.
There's a lot of things that have gone to another level, such as mBit and mBraining. There's new kinds of techniques that's available, and there's a lot of things in NLP that uh, have become either outdated or just simply new levels of understanding have taken a lot of techniques to a whole new form of application. So there's certainly those aspects. And then thirdly, depending upon the where and when and with whom you've learned NLP, depth is really important. NLP over the years has become incredibly commercialized and commoditized. It's become packaged as a product to sell. And as a result, a lot of the trainings, particularly in the last 10 years or so probably, have become less about getting students really understanding the technology and really being able to wield it at masterful levels. And instead, it's just more been about selling them a program and pumping them through, to be blunt. And it's one of those trends that made me want to get out of the commercialized form of trying to sell NLP trainings per se. So to review at a level where you can actually understand the technology in its depth, as opposed to just having done a program and gotten your certificate, would be a tremendous advantage for anyone really serious about developing skills of mastery with their coaching.
Yeah, I feel that way completely. Thank you, and also I'm thinking with MBIT as well from a leadership point of view. This now, me studying MBIT and me studying my NLP again. It's about authentic leadership and a true, um, a different level of authentic coaching. I think too, a different level of mastery that we can actually bring to leadership and to coaching. That's sort of my
Yes, and
personal
then
feel. Yeah.
yeah, and you'll know from your own personal experience as well that when people come through an MBIT coach session as the client, you end up in a very different place than traditional coaching approaches that might focus more on a behavioral action plan.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. So, Marvin, I'm conscious about the time. I've got one more question to ask, but just before that, I'll just let you know I've put up there on the screen, everybody, the book and the mBraining website, www.mbraining.com. So, I've received a number of questions whilst we've been talking, Marvin, on research papers and resources. And so, everybody, the mBraining website is fantastic. It's got interviews, it's got papers, it's got all sorts of great things there. It's also a list of certified coaches. It's a really great resource that Grant and Marvin are building every single day. So um, I'll let you know that that's there. Also, if you're keen, we're running a coach certification for MBIT here in Melbourne. And in Sydney, Stacey Ashley, our partner up in Sydney, is running a certification as well. Marvin's going to be hopefully at both of those programs, and we're very excited to be running an NLP practitioner training too, which is a bridging program, and just a couple of words on the bridging program. Marvin, what can people sort of expect if they want to come along to the NLP bridging course?
Yeah, thanks. It is a bridging course, so it doesn't. It's not starting from the very beginning. It assumes you've got already a bit of a background in NLP. So if you're interested, Natalie can send you um, some information as to the minimum content and skill sets you need to actually start. And it's very intense. It's because it's a bridging program. It doesn't start from a beginner's level. And it starts from assumption that you've got some experience and knowledge in it. We kick into gear very, very hot and heavy, very fast, so to speak.
Yes.
And a lot is really making sure that you've got, from INELPA standpoint, the INELPA certification criteria. INELPA is the International NLP Trainers Association that tries to, it makes its attempts to get you certified not only in the depth of the field, but also being able to have the knowledge and language to be able to go across different schools of NLP. There are many different schools of NLP around the world, so the INELPA curriculum is very, very comprehensive. It covers so many different forms of NLP to get you as highly skilled and cognizant as possible as to what's around the world from a global perspective. So you're going to be ready for a lot of practice. If your learning curve is going to be pretty steep on a bridging program because it's a shorter number of days because it assumes you've got the basics. We go into it with a fair degree of intensity. So if you're ready to do the hard work, if you're ready to actually really push yourself and get your skill sets way up there, then great, rise up to the challenge, and that's the bridging course.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will be running, just so people know, if you've done Open Doors Certificate 4 program or our diploma program, you're in a pretty good space for the bridging course. I'm also going to be running some webinars as well to give a bit of background information, well, background training, I suppose, to just familiarity so people are ready to go for the course. So thank you. And finally, there's a lot of questions that people have been asking, and I'm going to try to see if we can get all those questions together and either post them on our website or Facebook or send them out. So there's other questions people have been asking about which way the signals are flowing and talking about fear and courage and other things. So thank you to all those questions. I'm just sorry we haven't got enough time to cover them all. But not to worry, we've got plenty of time, through our connections on Facebook and the website, and people can contact myself or Marvin. So, Marvin, just as in closing, I've spent a lot of time with you, and I could talk to you all day, actually, or listen to you all day. That's for sure. Is there a message you want to leave us with today, based on everything we've talked about today?
Yeah, look, the major thing is, and it's very much what the whole point of mBraining and mBit is really all about, which is making, really working with yourself. To make global changes around the world, it really starts with self. And we can make more of a difference in individual, each and every one of us can make more of a difference than we probably realize. And it starts really with being the most authentic and truest self you can be. And I'm not talking about it in just airy-fairy idealistic terms. Meaning literally working with your head, heart, and gut, checking in with what's true for you in your heart, being creative in your head about how to express that into the world, and having the courage to do so, having the courage to live what's authentic for you. And when you do that, when you're actually coming from a place of integration of the three brains and they're functioning at their highest expressions of a compassionate, loving kindness that's connected to people and connected to yourself, creative and courageous, then we start to have what's called emergent wisdom. What has to happen is the way to approach your situations is far wiser than you would have done just simply in a reactive phase, overly stressed or overly depressed and trying to figure out how you're going to fix the situation or react to it. But when it's coming from an authentic expression, you start to live what's true for you in a way that people will notice. People get inspired, and it starts to make people reflect on themselves and being true within themselves. And there's no organization I've ever seen that makes a decision. It's not the organization. It's actually a handful of people, and often driven down to one or two people. And very similarly, families. One or two people can make a difference. In a relationship, only one person needs to make a change, and it makes a difference. All you have to do is really get connected in your three brains. Live in the most authentic, wisest way of doing and expressing yourself. And if we all did that, the world definitely starts changing.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Marvin. I know through even the programs we've done so far that the world it really is changing. And I mean that totally 100%. So thank you so much for your time today. As I said, we've got a lot of questions that we'll actually try to answer as we go. And if anyone wants to contact me to ask for further information, you can. So thank you once again. And thanks for everybody that's attended the session today. This has been by far our most highly attended session, which that in itself makes me very excited because everyone on the line, we are really looking at the latest advances in neuroscience now. We've always been proud to be ahead of the curve and to be doing outstanding and new coaching. So thanks everyone for joining us, and thanks Marvin once again. Enjoy your coaching,
Great,
everybody.
thanks. Thanks, Natalie.
Thank you.